Yo, what's up, welcome back to my channel. I got a really interesting video right here for you. Let's get right into this content. Subscribe to my channel, subscribe to their channel. I always got some good stuff for you to look at, super interesting content.
This video is sponsored by Squarespace. We're going to explore when cities turn inside out and go inside.
Can I hug you?
There are moments in time when different design disciplines, they're able to make the argument that theirs is the most important lens through which to understand or create cities. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, for instance, it was landscape design that was able to convince everyone that the city is just really one big landscape. They called it landscape urbanism. And the movement of interior urbanism came just prior to that, even if it wasn't always called that, and it never even really went away. It is one of architecture's more bloated examples of when architects claimed that buildings alone could solve almost anything that a city could throw at it. Interior urbanism describes interior spaces that are so large that they behave like cities. These may be found independent of a traditional city, and in that case they'd be like an island floating in an area of low density, or they can occur alongside a city and within it. One way that these types of spaces develop is maybe to solve a problem, and maybe they develop like an ad hoc growth through a series of convenient connections and walkways that are made between distinct spaces. This process of growth just happens for so long that it evolves organically into a city-like concoction. Or conversely, interior urbanism might be a purpose-built solution for public spaces that would be otherwise inhospitable that are outdoors due to weather or some other conditions. Or it might be the result of a business or developers that are trying to keep people within their web of space in order to just sell more products. Although one can build a history of spaces that marches through the evolution of interior urbanism, it would probably start some way with like enclosed gardens and biblical renderings of paradise, maybe go to the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park, London during the 19th century, and maybe conclude today with Facebook's headquarters building. The practice really finds its own in the beginning of the late 1960s and then continued through into the 1980s. You might think of familiar examples like interior malls as a kind of outcome of this shift in thinking. Or you may have experienced vast convention centers or multi-block developments from the 1980s, which were attempts to solve the crisis of people moving out of the downtown areas of cities. Vast interior spaces are defensible structures. And in places like where I grew up near Detroit, there, the Renaissance Center was supposed to be a gleaming beacon of modern construction as a jewel in the struggling city center. And the giant interior, it was meant to provide a safe and protected environment for the corporations that were inside, giving the feeling of being in a city in the middle of Detroit, while not really being in Detroit at all. We'll talk later in this video about the designer, John Portman. And while this is probably a pretty cynical interpretation of that building, interior urbanism is fraught with obvious benefits, but also some glaring issues. Vast, inescapable interior spaces are a popular trope of dystopian films and TV shows like Black Mirror. And I can't help thinking that I'm inside of one of those stories when I pass through this space called the Pedway here in Chicago.
Not that it's terrible, but it certainly has an uncanny quality to it. Like I'm in some no man's land of a film that isn't set anywhere in particular.
The Chicago Pedway is a system of underground tunnels and overhead bridges that links more than 40 blocks in the central business district and covers roughly 5 miles. It's used by tens of thousands of pedestrians every day, and it connects to the public, but also some private buildings and train stations and businesses that flank it. It results in an incoherent mixture of spaces that all have different qualities, different materials, different kinds of lighting, ceiling heights, etc. Development of the Pedway began in 1951, and since then the system has expanded to connect more than 50 buildings together in a string like a beaded necklace. It has grown through partnerships between the city and private building owners, and this makes it a curious mixture of public space, like a normal outdoor plaza or a street, but also a space that is monitored and controlled by the adjacent parties.
We'll talk more about how this might create problems later on, but more immediately, this ad hoc growth and ownership certainly contributes to a strange and confusing spatial condition. While we experience the space of the pedway as one continuous and unbroken
through a series of uncoordinated wayfinding signage, interior decor, and material changes, and to be honest, smells. One of the more strange areas is just underneath a hotel, whose pool abuts the pedway. There's glass partitions that separate the public space from where one would disrobe and then go for a dip. This area of the pedway also always smells like chlorine. There are huge urban scale factors that determine where the pedway snakes through. Even though we can't see the streets or where buildings stop and start, those things have a huge impact on where the pedway can take us. Building columns, for instance, pierce right through it, and I'm sure that the spaces dodge all sorts of things like the subway, or sewers, or ducts, or other amenities that populate the ground.
This is a small gallery that shows architecture and art shows.
There's the outside world, the stuff that supports the outside world that's inside of the dirt of the earth, and then there's this system of tunnels that creates another inhabitable world. It's distinct from that world outside, but the two worlds are intricately dependent on one another. This brings up concepts that we've talked about in other videos, like the idea of liminal space. Speaking of concepts latent within some of the other videos, I'm actually in the middle of building a website as a go-to place for the Architecture with Stuart channel, and that's why I'm so stoked to partner with Squarespace on this video. So far, I'm really pleased with the workflow and the ease of making something that's beautiful and functional. I initially chose Squarespace even before they reached out for a partnership because of all the portfolio templates, which could easily be used for showcasing my videos and descriptions, and the galleries are perfect for this. It's also perfect for any architect or designer or creative person looking to show off their work. It was also important to me that the platform could grow in case that we start selling anything, and Squarespace can host a merch store or sell tickets or anything all in one place. And marketing is made super easy by automatically pushing website content through to your social media channels.
It has its own weather. Chicago winters and even its summers can be pretty brutal. Today there are a few inches of snow on the ground, for instance. And this pressure to keep people out of harsh weather, it can be a driving factor for other interior urbanities like the pedways around the world.
Minneapolis, Minnesota, for instance, keeps theirs above ground in a system that they call the Skyway. It's a series of footbridges that stitch together buildings across 80 city blocks and for over 9.5 miles of downtown Minneapolis. Some buildings close at different times than others, making using the Skyway a little bit less cohesive. The initiative began as a way for the downtown to compete with the convenience of interior malls. Minneapolis is an extremely cold place, so the convenience of keeping things indoors is obvious. But other cities, like Houston or Atlanta, they make use of a similar system as a way of combating the extreme heat and its humidity.
One of the architects of Atlanta's vast network of interior spaces is the architect John Portman. He also designed the building that I'm visiting here. So far we've looked at mostly interior urbanism that sprawls horizontally. However, another type of space that can also work like interior cities are large vertical atriums. This building is the Hyatt Regency at O'Hare Airport. It was designed by John Portman and Associates in 1971. Portman is the undisputed genius of large atriums, especially in hotels. And this building was his second in a wave of atrium hotels that would seem to take over the 1970s, all the way from his 1969 Hyatt Regency in Atlanta to the Marriott Marquis in 1985.
You might also recognize these kinds of spaces from such settings as Disney's Loki Time Variance Authority, a bureaucratic organization that exists outside of time and space and monitors the timeline. This placeless and timeless interior is a perfect place to represent this faceless organization. Though this one is not such an extreme example, as many of Portman's other large atriums are actually much taller. This one does include some of the hallmarks that he would later develop, including the large public space in the middle of the building, flanked by hallways on every level, precarious footbridges that crisscross the space, and a giant glass elevator. All of these serve about 1,000 hotel rooms here and a conference center. All of these design moves are about really experiencing the full scope of the interior space, to feel its vastness.
John Portman sets us up to really experience the vast space of the atrium by getting us off in an elevator in a really compressed space, and then walking off and then entering back into the big atrium that we were in before.
To encourage moments of stillness and reflection, there are small pockets of carpeted zones with plush furniture for lounging in alone or in groups. These help to humanize the space, even though they're just a small blip within the vast volume. Part of the design ethos of a space like this is about establishing and maintaining consistency. Unlike, say, the pedway, which is a mess of spaces and sizes and materials and atmospheres, the John Portman lobby is singular and cohesive. Its form is relatively simple in volume and serves as a landmark to orient yourself. Often the large elevator tower that pierces through the middle space helps to keep things sorted out in your head. Materials are consistent and carry you through the entirety of the space. This makes the space seem like every problem was easy to solve, and the space remains cohesive and seamless. Whereas the pedway wears all of the scars and idiosyncrasies as a result of ad hoc growth, this kind of interior is clean and purposeful. It's designed by a singular author, and it carries none of the disruptions or the grime that a normal city would. This perception of easy, simplicity, and control is where interior urbanism can be somewhat problematic. These kinds of spaces disconnect you from the outside, so that you have no sense of time passing and you feel no consequences related to the outside world. What appears to be a gift and an amenity is in service of some people's interests over others. For instance, Frank Gehry's design for the Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park could certainly be classified as a more contemporary construction of interior urbanism. It's a vast 433,000 square foot space with meandering walkways that give it a feel of a crowded, upscale indoor village. It has a hugely tall ceiling with buildings inside of it that are made of wood. And of course, this is Facebook's offices, so while this space adopts the planning language of a city, it's really a space for production and doesn't truly carry the freedoms that are granted with a public space. In areas like Menlo Park, where Facebook is located, local restaurants and downtowns struggle to resist this tendency to put everything under one roof. Interior urbanism tends to pull people away from the diverse experiences that cities have to offer. City streets require a certain amount of life to keep them viable, and interior urbanism sucks those people away. In addition, public plazas or other spaces that can become void or lifeless when those people are sucked away, that can then deter even more people from ever using them in the first place. What are some interesting examples of interior urbanism that you know of? Let's chat about it in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, you might also enjoy some of these others. They come out every week on Thursdays, and before you head over—
Man, yo, you know, the topic of urbanism and all that stuff, bro, is extremely interesting. All those buildings, honestly, they just look like malls to me. They just like malls. I don't think they're like indoor villages, but I gotta see it, you know. Those things are connected by blocks, so that's just interesting. Like, comment, subscribe on my way to 10K. Subscribe to their channel too. I didn't mean to interrupt him. I'm gonna let him say the rest of his what he got to say, but subscribe to my channel as well, and I got you guys with another good video.
over there, please consider hitting that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. See you in the next video.